Monologue from the Ronnie Wood audiobook. You're everything but off the hook. You want a book? Why make a vow when I can take a bow? Want to pick a date? I'll be happy to take you out. So what if I'm an old bore? I get the spirit of a kid in my old core, and I cleaned up here long before with an encore. You're looking at a full house, I'm looking at a mop floor. My heart's an open book, yours is a storm door, so you're settling the wrong score. That's knocking our discussion off course. If you want more, and the town's not big enough, we can lock horns offshore. You think you want war more? Will you rattle like my picture on your dartboard hanging on your barn door? Metaphor? Bring your knife, son, you're terrified and you couldn't cut a shape on a dance floor. And mind your footing, or you're writing till your hands sore, cause following my lead's got you standing on a trapdoor. I'd never end up like my mother, I swore, so I'm double checking every glass of remorse I pour. I don't care who told you were clever, what's an education when your school's pish? About to knock this echo chamber school with 2 ticks. I can't see the forest for the wish trees. Radio can chew in a dick like your 2-bit hubris will get you fucking bull-whipped in a room full of cool hip school kids. I'm sitting by a pulpit with a toolkit. Your coo's lick has a huge quiff. You'll get hit with a couscous dip. You're a tourist and I'm sitting by your pool pished, chewing on your toothpicks. Loose lips sink cruise ships. If the shoe fits, might as well do flips in them new kicks. So I take the rough with the smooth. If she walks out, she better limp back in with a few new tricks. I'm too quick. Out the full clip. For your cruel wit, you want to slash knife crime? Here's 2 wrists. Welcome, I'm Loki. This is Thursday Conversation. We've been off for a few weeks. Been causing some mischief while we've been away. Thanks for joining us this evening. Fresh off the back of it seems anyway, the much talked about Common Fest gig that happened last week. I guess I could just talk about that for a few minutes. I, in my audacity, was invited to perform there. There were some great acts on the bill. I went on after Elaine C. Smith, who made a few choice jokes at the expense of men, so I thought she set a good precedent for a jovial discussion about class and feminism, one issue which I have experience of. During the performance, I made a joke about Madonna. The joke was preceded by me explaining that as a man, I am responsible at times for having some dodgy attitudes about women and not only not being aware of them, but not being honest about them. So I sort of set it up like that. Anyway, then I talked a little bit about how male feminists, or male feminism, is the ultimate male posturing. This idea that don't worry mate, you can get your Nat King Cole by telling the truth, you know. So I was trying to make it funny and then take it away from a serious thing, and I says, you know, instead of me being generally misogynistic, how about, like, I think feminists would appreciate if I just focus it all on Madonna. And the word Madonna is what provoked a big reaction in the audience. So on one hand, I had a group of women at the front who were quite upset. I tried to hand the mic over. I wanted to know what it was that I had done to upset them, because as a man, I can't really claim any authority on this subject, but obviously still feel the need to discuss it. And then on the other hand, I had a man called Angus in the crowd representing the now defunct, apparently, National Collective. And his contribution to the whole discussion was walk back to Pollock. I've heard more insightful remarks from UKIP members, to be perfectly frank. Anyway, it was nice. Common Fest was good. It was great for Commonwealth to take a chance on me. I hope that with all the discussion that's been generated, then that choice has been vindicated, and I look forward to collaborating them more often. I'm also available for children's parties. But anyway, enough about my favourite subject, me. It's my 31st birthday today. Happy birthday, Darren. Slow clap. I've got survivor's guilt having made it this far. Tonight we're going to be discussing the general election, and we're going to be discussing some of the choices that women might be facing in the general election, and some of the wider issues that women might be facing now or have faced that men like me might not be fully aware of. To enlighten us in this discussion, we have the Director of Engender, Emma Ritch.
Hi.
How you doing, Emma?
Good, thank you, Darren.
How's your day been?
It's been pretty busy, but it's been good, yeah. Looking at the manifestos, producing a summary of them, thinking about the choices for women in this election, carrying on the feminist fight.
The feminist fight, okay. So, let's just imagine I'm coming to this cold, which I guess I am in some ways. First of all, let's just talk about feminism as a concept. What is the main crux of feminism?
So I think feminists see the possibility for a better world in which women and men would have equal access to resources, to safety, to well-being, to happiness. And the main barrier in the way of all of that is a system which has been designed around men's needs, men's perspectives, men's interests, which is a really hard thing to see if you're a man, because the world just feels like it fits. It fits you, fits what you're doing, fits your interests. But that is a real issue for women today, and we haven't maybe come as far as we think. We've made a lot of progress, but we're definitely not there yet.
So am I right in saying that that almost imperceptible mechanics of what's going on in terms of different groups and how the society which is presented to them might have obstacles that others can't see? Men, for example, white men, white able-bodied, heterosexual, Christian men. So we're talking a wee bit about privilege. That's a concept that seems to come up time and time again. You know, and the idea that when I get up in the morning, society generally, until it comes to an issue of like perhaps class, then society generally works okay for me, being a man.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some people describe it as if you're, you know, the things you listed, a white, cisgendered, non-disabled man in the UK, then you're kind of playing life as a video game on its easiest setting, and other people within the UK are not having that same experience. But it's really hard to see. I mean, if you're a fish swimming in water, you don't know what water is, you don't know what wet is. So trying to unpick some of that privilege, I think, is a really hard task, but one that has to be achieved if we're ever going to achieve equality. Yeah,
I can relate to that, and I can also, like, I can identify with, you know, a male response might be, and I've been guilty of this in the past, this almost like, I'm trying to understand, but I'm just frustrated because, like, even just the words that I'm using, you're getting offended by that, you know? And it can be challenging, kind of bringing up privilege, because you're basically drawing someone's attention to something that they have no understanding of, and it can be difficult, especially if you're dealing with people who are educated. You know, that can be challenging. This in gender, we spoke a little bit earlier, and similar to a lot of people that I've spoken to since the referendum, as much as there are maybe lots of pros and cons, particularly after the vote, one of the indisputable benefits of the referendum was that it created a space for some discussions to exist which weren't really on the sort of mainstream radar before, and that includes feminism, female engagement in politics and wider society. So what was your experience during the referendum campaign?
It was really exciting for us. We had a whole bunch of women who hadn't previously been in contact with our organisation, a lot of women who told us they'd never been to a discussion about politics before, coming to events discussing the options that were open to them. And we had, we didn't have kind of hustings style events, we had quite participatory events where we had small tables with Yes and Better Together representatives talking about different issues for women, so women in the economy, violence against women, women in culture, media, all kinds of different issues. And women talked in those tables about all kinds of issues in their lives and where they saw the future of Scotland, what possibilities there were in independence, what possibilities there were in remaining within the Union. And I think it really, for some women, was transformational in the kind of idea that they could contribute to a discussion about politics, they could be involved in politics, they could see themselves influencing the national discussion about what kind of nation we wanted to be, which is such a powerful thing if you've never thought that you could in any way influence the conditions of your day-to-day life. So almost liberation, I think, for some women was the sense they got from that discussion. And I don't think there's been a regression. I mean, there's that, quote about we're not going back to our sofas now. And Women for Independence and others, I think, brought together huge numbers of women to campaign and to discuss ideas. But we've been involved in some hustings in the general election campaign, hundreds of women turning out to women-only hustings. I was at one in East Lothian earlier in the week, and I think you wouldn't have seen that so much in previous general elections. So although the same kind of issues aren't on the table in the same way, I think there is a sense that women want to have their say in politics, and that's absolutely right.
It's quite fascinating. And like I said, it runs parallel to a lot of groups in society who experience the same sort of, that sense of liberation almost, from the barriers almost in their own minds as well, about what, communities that suffer from low self-esteem, which might manifest as self-defeating behaviour, which is then diagnosed by, a specialist class. We've got something for that, calm down. Could we just talk a little bit more specifically about what are the barriers that women face, in this society you're talking about? I like the computer game metaphor. I think a lot of our folks at home might identify with that. That's a nice get the ball on the deck kind of concept. So on a day-to-day sort of basis, what are the barriers that women may face, which men exercising privilege they're not aware of? What does that look like? What does that feel like?
So I think one that comes up a lot that men are really surprised exists is street harassment. And I think if you asked any woman in Scotland, she's had endless strings of comments from guys in the street. Why don't you smile? Comments on her body, what she's wearing, really sexual harassment kind of comments. And I think that's completely invisible to a lot of men who, because they are men and move through public space as men, never see this. So if they're with women in their lives, then those comments aren't made. Or sometimes if they're made by accident because someone hasn't perceived the two people to be together, it's the men who get apologised to. I'm sorry, I disrespected you by insulting your woman. So I think that's that's a really common, everyday, regular experience that women have, and so I think that really affects the way women engage with just the day-to-day, leaving their flat, going to work, being on public transport, constantly thinking about how and when they could best protect themselves. Could they look busy? Could they not make eye contact? Could they smile defensively at people? Just a whole raft of thoughts about just that very day-to-day activity. Transport is another one. Transport systems are designed around commuters going from the outside of urban spaces to the middle to work and then going back at the end of the day. If you have a child to take to nursery, which is a predominantly female activity, although more men are involved in childcare now, then the transport system will not facilitate or enable that, or it will be really expensive to take multiple journeys. So the idea of people doing childcare and then working, or doing childcare and taking other children to school, has not really in any profound way entered the minds of the transport planners, despite the fact that women are 52% of the population and a lot of women will have children. So it's just really basic day-to-day life. And it's almost,
it's the simplicity of it, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I think that could be, it's the simplicity of it that eludes some people, because they wouldn't expect it to be that simple.
Absolutely.
In terms of, thanks first of all for sort of I'm sure that some of these issues that you're discussing have been of a personal nature in the past, being a woman yourself. So thanks for that insight into your day-to-day experience, because I think it would encourage other people to speak up a little bit. In terms of my own experience, right, as a man, right, I declare myself a man. Where I started to really find that I had a lot of more solidarity than I would have traditionally thought with feminism, or women that I know who are feminists, of all different persuasions, is a misunderstanding that it's one big general, this is one voice for all women, but there are lots of disagreement within feminism.
Absolutely.
When I started to develop the language to articulate some of the barriers that I was facing coming from a working class background, or some of the people that, it's assumed that I would speak on behalf of, people from my community, judgment from wider society, policing of our tones when we speak. So there's this common misconception, I believe a misconception anyway, that a person, in order for the complaint with society to be taken serious, must voice that complaint in a way that sounds like it's being voiced by the privileged man.
Yeah.
Almost. Yeah. It's like, you got an issue, we'll listen to you once you start talking a bit more like us. And I started to see a lot of overlap. And then it was like, hang on, right, so we've got more in common. But then I started talking about feminism, or trying to talk about it, and then I had women coming to me and saying, well, no, you were a bit wrong there with what you said, particularly my assumptions on gender roles. So I said something along the lines of, guys, if you just listen to your woman, your life will be better. And what is the problem with that statement? Because in my experience, it's invariably has been true. Women, in my mind, most women that I've met or know, they have a different kind of capacity for care, which I, myself, aspire to, for the example set by a woman. But within that, there's a problem. I'm making an assumption.
Yeah, I mean, I think women are socialised. I think gender, all the evidence suggests that men's and women's brains are not fundamentally different. There's no kind of biological explanation that suggests, except for in the very early moments of human life, where obviously women can physically give birth to children, and trans men, of course, and breastfeed a child. After that, there's really no difference in terms of capacity for care. So I think when we look at the difference in gender roles in terms of who does the care, that is what we would describe as being socialised. So it's not intrinsic to men and women. It's something which we kind of assume is going to happen. We do, as we used the word police earlier, we police that quite rigidly. So, men who perform even the most minor care tasks for their children will be applauded as if they've painted the roof of the Sistine Chapel. It seems preposterous that a man could go to the supermarket with a baby, and men will actually get stopped if they're, in sole charge of a child, and congratulated for the Herculean task of doing something which women do all the time. And it is important to recognise the role that fathers play and can play, but it certainly isn't, it's not biologically explainable. So it's something that we've kind of done as a society. We've created this idea that women care, and rewarded women who do, and told women off who haven't.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks for educating me on that. I just thought it was important to bring up. I guess part of my reason for wanting to do this discussion is because, I'm not necessarily afraid of someone saying, well, maybe you should rethink this. Sometimes that can create a safe space for other guys.
Yeah, for sure.
To put their hand up and say, oh my God, I was actually a bit of a misogynist and I didn't realise it. Maybe I could just go, using as a reference point, some attitudes that I've held about women unconsciously, that later have been challenged and I've had to sit and figure it out. So one of the big sort of retorts to what I thought was aggressive feminism was, well, I mean, if you're such a feminist, then why are you, it might sound preposterous now, why are you changing your body to appeal to a man? Why are you shaving your body hair off? And I can see how that's nonsense now. But I would imagine there are typical retorts like that come up from men who have still got a wee bit to go in terms of understanding.
Yeah, but I think that question is an interesting question, and there's lots of disagreement about that within feminism as well. So I don't think it's a silly question. I think, there's Naomi Wolf wrote The Beauty Myth, which was a critique of the beauty industrial complex. There are other feminist schools of thought which say, why is femininity seen as trivial? Why is makeup a trivial pursuit? But, physics isn't a trivial pursuit. There's maybe as much knowledge about makeup as there is about many other things. So, why are we saying that it's ridiculous to care about these things? So I think all feminists have to make a choice about how they navigate life in the real world, because we live live within the system we live within. For some women, there'll be a huge cost to not wearing makeup in terms of profession or work. Some workplaces mandate makeup or specific kinds of clothing, which, you know, some other schools of feminism may critique. So there's a lot going on in there. And I think that dialogue is just really important, and being willing to consider new ideas and being willing to think about things. I don't think there's a wrong answer within all of that.
It's really fascinating. You sort of alluded there to consumer culture.
Yes.
And this is something that keeps coming up again and again with different types of groups. So we have, you know, people are disagreeing on grounds of class, people are disagreeing on grounds of gender, race, political affiliation, you name it. There are 2 or 3 different factions, all in their little conclave arguing about it. But in the background of this, like Google Chrome sucking up all the memory, then what you have is a society where our roles have very much been prescribed for us through advertising, subtle things that we learn even through the TV shows that we watch about what the role of certain people is, and you see that through time.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of questions in that you know, that as we're debating with each other, encouraging that awareness of the fact that a lot of this is kind of simulated for us.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you have anything that maybe speaks to that wider concept.
I mean, I think that there's a lot of money to be made in gender differentiation, and so I think a lot of people shared on Facebook a few years ago that old Lego advert where they had a young girl playing with, you know, traditional mainstream Lego. Now they've invented a bunch of pink Lego for girls, and they've invented a whole bunch of products that are pink that used to be just, you know, a colour that boys and girls would be equally happy with. I saw someone on Twitter yesterday talking about the Princess Industrial Complex, and Disney Princess is a $3 billion brand now, and they're going into maternity hospitals to try and raise brand awareness with literally newborn babies, so that later in life girls will be entranced by the Disney Princess brand. So there is so much money to be made in this notion that boys and girls are fundamentally different and want different kinds of products and services, that I think there is a massive challenge for feminism and people who are challenging consumer culture more broadly to kind of critique all of that. And there's been a few interesting initiatives, Pink Stinks, kind of pointing out the ludicrousness of having, you know, girls' magazines and boys' magazines and girls' toys and boys' toys advertised in supermarkets and other spaces. But it's a constant kind of battle, I think, and the examples keep getting more egregious. There was, I think it was Yale University Bookshop was selling baby grows, and they were 2 next to each other, and the one designed for girls said, "My thighs are too fat," and it was designed for a baby, and the one next to it was a boy's kind of superhero onesie saying, I'm amazing, or I'm super, in kind of Supermanish font. And so that's the kind of gendered messages being sent out to infants.
That, when we're dealing with advertising and children, that's very aggressive.
Yes.
Very, very aggressive. And ironic that, perhaps not even ironic at this point, advertising is deemed a noble profession, you know, and perhaps in some ways it is. But there, at the minute, don't seem to be any limitations or regulations of a serious nature that prevent people from directly placing ideas into the subconscious of our children.
Yeah.
Almost sort of creating a consumer pathos from the start. You know, so they're just, when they grow up, they have these consumer values.
Absolutely.
And that's a kind of, that I want to move on to something else, but just, I thought that was really interesting that you touched on that, because I think that really broadens the scope, because everyone's affected by those things. A couple of things that I wanted to talk about, where concepts that some people might be familiar with or might not be familiar with. Today it was reported that a judge was quoted as saying that a recently murdered girl had put herself in a vulnerable position, and there was a lot of understandable outcry about that, and this concept of victim blaming came up. Not everyone might be familiar with that concept. So could you maybe talk a wee bit about what victim blaming is? And
Sure. So, I mean, the judge in question, was referring to the murder of Karen Buckley, which was obviously completely inappropriate because I don't think there are any facts in the public domain about that. And his point was he was talking about another woman who'd been assaulted, actually by a woman, and he was saying that because the victim was drunk, she'd essentially made herself vulnerable, and then went on to make a broader comment about, you know, these young girls today, just out and about drinking too much, I suppose, in his view, and therefore at risk, in his view, of experiencing assault. We see that a lot with violence against women, so particularly rape and sexual assault. And I think all of the kind of attitude surveys suggest that a lot of people, men and women, blame women who are raped if they have been drinking, if they're wearing skirts that are short, sometimes if they're wearing makeup, sometimes if they've gone home with somebody they've just met. And so that idea that there is some culpability on the part of someone who's experienced a serious crime is kind of shorthanded as victim blaming, because you're saying it's the responsibility of the victim to avoid crime, which is just completely preposterous. And also, we would criticise it because it doesn't make any sense. Women are most vulnerable to rape when they're in their own houses with people they know, not when they're out and about on a Saturday night having a good time with their pals. So it makes no sense on the face of it, and it's also a pretty disgusting way to...
That sort of, I think that the fact that it was a judge as well, I think that this alludes to almost structural misogyny.
Yes.
You know, I guess we talked a little bit earlier about male feminism, right, or male feminists, right? Obviously I joked when I said that men can't be feminists, and that's male posturing. How could men show solidarity to a feminist cause if said men are admittedly uneducated about it as a concept, and also, if they were honest with themselves, have harboured less than healthy attitudes to the opposite sex? How do we men reform ourselves, engaging in a dialogue? How best may I serve your cause? Can I serve your cause? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's loads of men who are fantastic allies to feminist work, and there's a lot of men doing feminist work as well. And I suppose an approach that we talk about quite a lot is the bystander approach. And so there's some evidence to suggest that if someone cracks a sexist joke or makes a joke about rape, or makes a kind of sexually harassive comment to a woman walking past, the men with them won't necessarily approve of that, but they may all think that all the other guys around them, are on board with this whole thing, and so don't want to rock the boat by saying something because you don't want to look like a complete tool in front of your pals. Actually, if somebody says, that's not really that cool to be saying things like that, or doesn't smile, or, just registers some really mild kind of resistance, then that enables all of the other men to kind of go along with that, because someone's finally broken the silence on what everyone's thinking. So it can be really quite subtle. I think also a willingness, and I think you've talked about this before, just to engage in conversation and dialogue, and also be a bit receptive to some challenge. And I think there are some issues with some of the discussions that happen on Twitter. Sometimes people are really angry. They've been living with really difficult circumstances for a long time in terms of their experience of discrimination or harassment or whatever. And so they're maybe not going to be very polite when they point out that something you've said seems a bit sexist. I think we all experience privilege. There's one person in the world who is the least privileged person in the world, and they don't have any privilege to check. All the rest of us do. And it's uncomfortable sometimes. But I think it's something, if we want to be good humans, we want to see a progressive Scotland, we want to see a progressive world, then I think we do sometimes have to go, do you know what, maybe I wasn't right about that. Maybe my first instinct wasn't the best instinct. Maybe brushing off that fact wasn't, maybe that's reality. So I guess look into things a little bit more than we might want to.
Yeah, agreed, and thanks for that. I just wanted to go on to talk about the general election, this big thing that we've got coming up where we need to decide again.
Yep.
We need to decide again. We're being asked again what we think. So, there's awful lot of talk about the big stark choices that we have this time and how it's the biggest choice that we've had since 1992, which isn't that long ago.
No, it's not that long ago.
To be honest. But the choices are different for women. Is that right or wrong? And if it is right or wrong, then can we go on to talk about what is the difference?
Yeah.
What are women facing at this general election?
I suppose, I mean, for us, we've taken a kind of good look at all the manifestos and seen what they're saying about women and what they're saying about some of the issues around women's equality. The manifestos generally are a bit disappointing for us in terms of the fact that they haven't really got to grips with a lot of the inequalities that women face. There's some differentiation in terms of things like welfare reform, which we are hugely interested in. 85% of the cuts since 2010 have come from women's pockets.
Wow.
Wow. I know, 85p out of every pound that has been saved of the 26 billion in savings, so that's 22 billion been kind of picked from the pockets of women, and women who really needed that income in terms of social security, public services, pay, and access to pensions. So we wanted to see what the parties were doing in terms of that. We've summarised all of that. So I think that might be something that that voters should be looking at particularly. I mean, women are interested in the same issues as everyone else: the economy, jobs, how things are kind of going in society. But women do use public services a lot more than men. Do rely much more on social security. They're twice as dependent on social security as men because of unequal caring responsibilities.
Because they're lazy.
Because they're more likely to be lone parents.
Women. That's absolutely shocking.
I'm going to have to push back on that slightly. Yeah.
No, it's okay. I know.
And I suppose issues like Trident, I mean, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and a lot of feminists are really interested in kind of spend on the continuous at-sea roving nuclear subs that we have. So there's a number of issues that are maybe specifically or more of interest to women: equality law, some of the human rights stuff that's happening. So we've taken a look at all of that. Obviously, as a charity, as an organisation with members with a wide range of views, we don't pick a winner, as it were, but we've set out the position for anyone who wants to take a look at it on our website.
Would you say that, I mean, let's just say overall, since the referendum to now, as we lead into the general election, has there been any regression in some of the progress that was made, from maybe 2013 through? What's the difference between that the political context here and the space that exists for feminist concerns and leading into the general election? Is there any difference?
I mean, I think the process of manifesto development is quite different from the process of considering what you want your nation to look like. And so it just hasn't been as open a discussion. It feels quite remote in some ways, the UK general election, although it obviously has a lot of relevance for women in Scotland. But I think it's been a much less exciting discussion. I think actually some of the discussions that there were around the referendum have put a bit of pressure on some of the manifestos, and I think we've seen in some of the parties an engagement with some of the issues that came up. But it is a completely different, much flatter, less engaging conversation than the one that was had around IndieRef.
Okay, well, I just want to thank you for now. I'm going to just double check to see if we've got any audience engagement happening this evening. And also I wanted to ask, see how we've got this screen behind us here? Does everyone only see half of our face, or is that just the screen?
No, you can see
they can see all my face. Well, thank you. It means they can see all your face as well, and I think that's a lot better for them. Do we have any audience engagement this evening?
Yeah, there's a little bit here. A couple of things, comments. Slack thought you were a wee bit angry at the start there, Darren. It was your intro. You could sense the anger. There's a few people like your hair, Emma.
Oh, excellent.
There's also the Seaplane came up with a comment: 22 women presidents / prime ministers. and one chancellor today. How is feminism still relevant? And the other thought earlier was, what do you think of the thoughts on the current media interest in Nicola's kind of image? Has to sharpen up a lot. Is that what it takes?
Okay, let's take the why is feminism still relevant? Why is to me, I don't know if that's someone being deliberately glib.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that question comes up a lot, and I think, you know, even people looking at the new political kind of framework in Scotland, where we have a 50-50 cabinet for the very first time, a female first minister for the very first time, all of that's great, as is the increasing representation in the most senior levels around the world. But I think if you look at political representation around the world, then you can see that there's absolutely we're not within sniffing distance of equality. There's more men, what's the statistic about the MPs representation? I think there's been more. No, I can't remember what it is. It's something about there's more men in the House of Commons now than there's ever been women in the House of Commons. So in the entire existence of the House of Commons, there have been fewer women than there are men sitting there right now. So we're kind of nowhere near parity at all.
And I guess the question makes an assumption that once we have what is perceived to be some sort of parity or equality, then the issue just plateaus and no longer needs to be discussed.
Absolutely, which is totally not what the evidence tells us. I mean, I think it's been really interesting to see what a difference having a female first minister has made in terms of the profile of gender equality. And I've been told by people who work in banks on the equality and human rights agenda, and God love them, that suddenly they're being asked to give briefings at really senior levels because people have clocked the fact that the first minister's agenda includes women's equality, and they're now interested because that political leadership has emerged. But it's you know, we're at the very first step of that journey. We're not at the end just because we've achieved a 50-50 cabinet.
We have another question, I believe. One more.
You make one from 11 Up Music, which says, "What did Maggie Thatcher ever do for feminism?" What should do for feminism?
Ooh, interesting question.
That's from 11 Up Music.
I mean, Margaret Thatcher, I don't think would have described herself as a feminist, and I would probably agree with her on that. I think that kind of raises an interesting question about women's representation. Is it just enough to have women engaged in political life, or do they actually have to care about women's equality for things to change? And the answer is the second one. I mean, having women involved in political spaces is important in and of itself because women know about women's lives, and so the kind of day-to-day experience, and that's really important. But we absolutely need feminist women to be around the decision-making tables.
Just as we wrap things up, you want to give the viewers any information about yourself or your organisation so that they can go and begin their own research into the good work that you're doing?
Sure. I think our website is probably the best place to start, and that's www.engender.org.uk.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, it's been fabulous to talk to you. It's been very illuminating for myself. And thanks for going easy on me as well, which I noticed. You know, that's that kind of thing about meeting halfway. I think if more people could do that, we can broach a lot of difficult conversations.
For sure.
Yeah, certainly. I'm sure the viewers are already logging into the site, and I'll definitely watch the run-up to the general election with a wee bit more awareness now that I didn't have earlier. So cool. I'm grateful to that, and I'm sure the viewers are too.
Thanks for having me on.
No problem. So just before we finish, we've got a few more minutes. Just before we finish, I want to just kind of like totally pivot to another unrelated subject. And it was the Daily Record ran an article yesterday, front page in fact. I think it was in relation to the what was described in the front page as the draconian cuts to care services for children. And it was a very moving front page. It was great coverage. It talked about how children under these draconian cuts are doomed to Dickensian levels of, you know, almost abandonment by society. Children, orphans, basically. It was very moving, and it was nice to see the Daily Record covering something like that. The problem is obviously that when those kids become teenagers, and start wearing hoodies and start behaving challenging in a challenging fashion in their own communities, the Daily Record will go after them. The Daily Record, I guess this could be called victim blaming. The Daily Record will go after them. It will use the same adjectives to describe them as it uses to describe convicted sex offenders. It will make no moral distinction. So obviously we see the Daily Record at war with itself. And I think as a society that reflects all of us. We hold on to this image of the child being abused, the kid on the stairs with their head in their hands, alone in a house. And we think, this is outrageous, how can we sit back and let this happen? And understandably, we move to try and help and try and show concern. Of course, when that kid becomes a teenager and all of the abuse that they've suffered, physical, mental, emotional, manifests as a kid drinking too much, perpetrating acts of violence against other young people, we as a society punish that child. We punish it, we reject it, we exclude it from our schools, we build prisons to put them in. Well, we hope that we'll rehabilitate them. Until as a society we actually think more critically about that particular issue, then we are actually, in my opinion, Daily Record included, are willful participants in a cycle of abuse which is structural. And so those little kids that we feign concern for, we're inadvertently allowing the abuse to continue. That was just some food for thought for you. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week with the charismatic Cat Boyd. Until then, enjoy Thursday. Peace out.